Hello and welcome to this new video. It's a pleasure for me to see you here and what we want to talk about today. So today I want to talk a little bit about the CVSS Calculator. Why do you need it? What you can do with this? Where you can get the CVSS values and what does it mean for you as a in your daily job and how to deal with environmental metric. So if this is interesting for you, then you're right here. By the way, my name is Van Ruppert, I'm from Germany, but right now I'm here in the Swedish woods. I'm here in the field now on a longer hike. I think, yeah, it's my third day. And I really love this environment. So I will take you to two journeys today. So one to the Swedish woods and the other one to the CVSS Calculator. By the way, if you're the first time on my channel, a big welcome from my side, and it would be a pleasure for me to see you as my new subscriber. And if you like this video, not only subscribe to the channel, but please give me a thumbs up as well. So now it's time to walk a little bit and start with the topic CVSS Calculator. Okay, we want to use this CVSS calculator, but for a CVSS calculator you need a CVSS value. And I have a very long and extensive video about the CVSS matrix itself. So what are the core components, what are the attributes of each component or each metric. So check out my YouTube channel there. You will find some more or way more detailed information about this one. But here, to understand the CVSS calculator, you need an understanding or basic understanding about the CVSS value itself is based on three components: the basic metric, temporal metric, and the environmental metric. The basic metric, this is more or less a description of the worst case of this vulnerability. Everybody can calculate this base metric, so mostly the guy who found this vulnerability will be responsible to calculate and declare this vulnerability. So in this base metric, it is a worst case scenario, so it's the description of the description of the worst case of this vulnerability. What are the components? You will find a lot of components like, do you need a user interaction? Is it possible to attack it over a network, just over a loopback, or do you need physical access to this machine, and so on and so on. So you have a bunch of metrics, and a lot of these metrics are very objective, so it means do you need user interaction? Yes or no, it's very clear to describe. But some other metrics are not so clear. But what you can imagine is, if you need physical access to the machine, it's a way lower score of this basic metric compared to if it is connected to the internet, to the wide area network or whatever, then you can do it completely remote. Okay, so you have different weights here inside this basic metric, and this will declare the basic score of this vulnerability. If you're a security researcher, your intrinsic motivation is to have a very high score because you want to sell this vulnerability, you want to be famous, reputation, and all this stuff. So compared to this company that has to declare a vulnerability inside their own product, mostly they try to keep this value low. You know? The range is not too big, so it could not completely compromise this description. So if you say, okay, I need a user interaction as a company, and it's clear that you don't need a user interaction, so the score would be higher, way higher, then someone would find it out, and you would find it immediately somewhere from people that are verifying it. But you have some slightly changes. Have this in mind, that you have this tiny difference, that's possible. But the main thing is the basic metric is really the core of the whole CVSS value. Everybody can calculate it, and it's a description of the worst case scenario of this vulnerability. The next value that's part of the CVSS value is the temporal metric. The temporal metric is more or less a description of the change over time, It means if you have a patch already, if you have a workaround, if you have just a fix or whatever, then it will change the CVSS value. If you have for this vulnerability just a proof of concept, or you have an automatic running virus or worm that is fully automatically using this vulnerability, then the value is higher. So over the time, this value can be changed with a temporal metric. The temporal metric is a description of all this variable time. So do you have just a proof of concept, or do you have completely running programs that are doing it? Do you have verification of different things, and so on and so on? Do you have patches? So the temporal metric will change over the time and can be influenced by more or less different people. You should have in mind that, for example, it's a difference between I have a workaround, I have a hotfix, or it's part of the next product release. So I think that's enough. For the temporal metric, as I mentioned in my YouTube video about the CVSS metrics itself, I will explain all of this temporal metrics. Then it's maybe a little bit more clear what is a change all the time. But have in mind, it's changing all the time, and it's not done by you, it's done by externals as well. But it could be different externals, so not the researchers that found the vulnerability. It could be an external research team, it could be an external security company that evolved this one because they found a patch, and so on and so on. Okay, the next thing what we need is, or the next component of the CVSS value is an environmental metric. And the environmental metric is exactly this element or this part of the CVSS value that you need to transform the core CVSS value to your needs, to your environment. And this environmental metric, what does it mean? For example, you have an high CVSS value because inside the description you will find something like, if this is connected to the internet, you can use the remote or the network stack to compromise the system. Okay. But your system, your installation is inside a building, inside a local network, completely isolated, air-gapped from the internet. So you really need physical access to the building to have some point or some possibility to come through this network, because it's really an isolated one. Then the CVSS value is completely different for you because someone has to come into the building first. He cannot sit in some other country and to attack your system. So it means this can up and down, or this can increase or decrease the CVSS value based on your needs. The same with user interaction. Okay, you can configure it in a way that, for example, normally you need a user interaction on local user inside the system, but you configure it in a way that everybody who go through this service will have a default user. So with this, you have a user already. Then it would increase the CVSS value. So it really depends on your need, on your configuration, on your environment. And with this, you are able to scale the original CVSS value, the general CVSS value, up and down. And this is for you the possibility to prioritize in the right way the CVSS values or the vulnerabilities, which one is really important for you, which one you should fix first. And so the environmental metric, to calculate this, we are using the CVSS Calculator. We can do different things with the CVSS Calculator. First of all, we have to transform the values into the calculator. I will show it a little bit later. On the other side, you can analyze the behavior or the components of the CVSS, so you can learn about the CVSS values up and down, so each component. And with the environmental metric, you can declare, for example, if confidentiality or integrity of the system is different. Let's say integrity. So in the core description is, with this vulnerability, you can change the integrity of the system immediately. Okay, and this is a very high risk, or it's a very high value inside the CVSS score. But for you, the system and the data it's just a tiny system. It's not important for you, and the integrity of the data is not so important for you. Then you can say, okay, my requirement through this integrity is very, very low. So you have different components. By the way, check out my CVSS metrics video, and then you will get more information about each metric. But in the main thing, you got it. The basic metric is a worst case scenario. The temporal metric is more or less external as well, defined what is the current state of patches, fixes, and all this stuff. And then the environmental metric is exactly what you can use to scale these values to your environment. But we need a little bit more about, to know more about vulnerabilities. And for this, I want to explore a little bit the term CVE. Okay, so the next thing what I wanted to explain is the CVE, the Common Vulnerability and Exposure number. That is a description, or it's an identity for vulnerabilities. This identity is used, or it's created, because in the history, if we want to describe a vulnerability, for example, there is this very critical thing for this Internet Explorer or whatever, then you had different vulnerabilities. Or a very interesting thing is, for example, the Log4j shell hack. It's not only one vulnerability, there are a few vulnerabilities, and this vulnerabilities needs now special identity so that you can explicitly address one vulnerability. So, organize, or the catalog is created by the MITRE, the MITRE Corporation. It's a corporation inside the US that is sponsored by Homeland Security and some other US governments. And the responsible for them is, first of all, to make sure that we have no overlapping CVEs. I will talk a little bit later how the CVEs are generated, who is able to create a CVE, and what's the schema of the CVE. But the main thing is that the CVE itself will give every vulnerability, or the most vulnerabilities, an identity, and under this identity you can search for documentation in all this. So you have these knowledge pools, and this knowledge pools, some mosquitoes here, these knowledge pools will give you all the necessary information about mitigation and remediation information, the history, and so on and so on. So this is one way to get more information to calibrate later with environmental metrics the CVSS value for you. Okay. So CVE is an identity for vulnerabilities. Have in mind that for malicious packages you will not get CVEs. It's just for vulnerabilities and not for malicious packages. Why? I don't know. But it's just right now the case here in mid of 2022. There is no CVE for malicious packages. And so that's more or less everything for the understanding why we haven't CVE. We needed to address it. It's for you something to read more or find more information about the vulnerability itself. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the CVE number itself, so how it's defined. You will find mostly in the beginning this CVE. Then you have something like a year. It's mostly 2020, 2021, and so on and so on. And then you have 4 digits. It means in the beginning they thought that 9999 would be enough for all the vulnerabilities per year, but it turned out that's not the case. So at least, or minimum, is 4 digits, and then it could be extended just if it is needed, and mostly it's needed because the amount of vulnerabilities compared to what happened in the past is constantly increasing. So yes, we need no more numbers. But for you, it's interesting, CVE, the year number, and then the digits. One thing, the year number doesn't mean that this vulnerability was found in a dedicated year. It's more or less a timestamp of registration to register this number. Okay, because there are several places where you can get the CVE number from. I will explain it in a few minutes. But it means if you found it last year, but you're registering today the number, then you will get a CVE number from this year, not from last year. Okay, walking around this area it's nice, but you're getting warm quite fast, because it's up and down. It's just somewhere here through all this stuff, but I found this nice place at the lake, so we'll have some minutes here. So, but we talk about CVE numbers. So we now know how the CVE number is structured, but how to get this CVE number, who's organizing it, because the structure of a number doesn't mean that everybody can just request it. Okay, everybody can request it, but it must be a CVE number authority. So we have these root authorities. I think it's Mitre itself and some Japanese thing, and I don't know if there are other root authorities as well. And they are giving the authority to other smaller groups. It could be dedicated, it could be interest groups or organizations, it could be a company, it could be whatever. And they are dividing this responsibility along technologies or product or whatever. If you found something, then you're going to one of these authorities. Maybe they're redirecting you to the right one if they are not responsible for this. But in the end, they're giving you a number with a term reserved. Reserved means that you have now the possibility to bring all this information like description, links, and so on and so on. And for all others, this number is so far reserved. And then, if everything is right, it will switch from reserved to now approved or actual given to you. Okay, so and that's the way. So with this, we have now the we guarantee with this structure that all numbers are forgiven just once, and that there is not everybody just requesting some random number for different purposes. Yeah, so root authorities. Below root authorities, we have all these other authorities with organizations, companies, whatever. And then you will get your number, push all the information through them, and then it's not only reserved, it's approved, and the CVE is given. Where can I find the CVE numbers? CVE numbers I will find, for example, if I'm searching for vulnerabilities in Google, then I will find associated CVE numbers. I will find maybe the original reference and documentation around the CVE. But you will find at several places inside the JFrog platform CVE numbers as well. And this I want to go through step by step now. So, where are the places inside the JFrog platform? One is, for example, the watches and policies and watches. So it means that inside these watches where you can define what repository you want to scan, you will get this vulnerability list of found known vulnerabilities. And then you find in this table, for example, the CVE number, if there is a CVE number available. And the detailed description through this vulnerability, you find reference documentation, additional documentation, remediation, mitigation information. But you can use the CVE number, copy-paste from the web UI, search in Google for the original reference of documentation if you need, and then searching for this one. So inside the watches you will get definitely CVEs to the known vulnerabilities that are found. But that's not the only place. So, what is the next place I want to mention? The next place I want to mention is the on-demand scanning. On-demand scanning is if you're scanning on your local machine, and then this result will be pushed to Artifactory, and there in this vulnerability list you find again the CVE numbers, the vulnerability, and the detailed description. For this you have the possibility to scan outside of your CI environment, so really on your laptop, but the documentation about the result is inside Artifactory. And then you can search for this CVEs or do your research how critical this one is for you. Okay, we got now so many places where we are getting the CVE. Additionally, I can mention that you will get the CVE values, for example, inside the build info, if you're using the IDE plugin, or if you're just doing a scan on command line, so on the command line interface. But with the CVE, you are able to get more information about the vulnerability itself, but what we need is a CVSS value. Not only the CVSS value, but the components of the basic metric, because we want to work with the environmental metric in a few minutes to recalibrate the CVSS value. So everywhere you will find CVE numbers is available, so you get the information, but you get the CVSS value. And inside the web application, for example, if you're going through the CVSS value and clicking on the CVSS value, make sure that you're getting the right ones for CVSS 2 or 3.1. So I would recommend use the 3.1 or the 3, the red one here right now in this web interface. Click on this one and you will get this overview of the components, basic matrix of the CVSS value. And exactly these values we need to feed this one into the CVSS calculator to work on the environmental metric. But this we will cover now. So we have now the CVSS values. We know how to get these basic values from several places. And with this basic matrix, with these values, we have to feed now the CVSS calculator. So how this is done, where you find it in the internet, and how you can work with this CVSS calculator to generate the environmental metrics, I will show you in a screencast because it's a bit more complicated to describe it in this way. And I think, yeah, a little bit screencasting is okay. So see you in a minute on my PC.
Okay, now we're coming to the vulnerability scoring calculator and how to find it. So what you will find here on first.org, here in first.org, you will find all information about the organization in itself. And here we have under standards and publications and standards, the vulnerability scoring system. If you're going here, you will see here the different versions of it. I'm not going with the mouse over because then the menu is just jumping. So you have the version 1, 2, 3, 3.1. And if you're going to the latest, here in this case, it's version 3.1, I see not only the specification and user guide, I see the calculator itself. The calculator itself is first quite plain, and this means that you have to put the CVSS values, for example, from X-ray here in. So we see, for example, we have an attack vector. You can do it over the network. We have an attack complexity that's low. We need, I don't know, some low privilege, but we have no user interaction necessary. The scope is maybe unchanged, and I don't know, low. So something like this. So now we have here the scope 6.3. And the temporal score, we find the values. So, for example, if it is a proof of concept, a functional code example, or it's even a full autonomous code. We have the remediation level. If you have a temporal fix, for example, or it's unavailable, or we have a workaround, something like this. And report confidence, it's reasonable that this is existing, or it's even confirmed or unknown. So you see that these values are changing, and to analyze the CVSS score, what you have here and what are the critical things. For example, is scope something that is very critical? Yes or no? And you see, oh yes, if I can escape the scope, scope is something new here in the CVSS version 3.1, then you can break out of the virtual system into the whole system, and this is something that is very critical, for example. Okay. Then, if we're going here down, we see the environmental score. And the environmental score is more or less the possibility to adjust all these metrics. And as you can see here, the latest one, the 6.9, is here reflected. And now we start working on it. For example, we say we have an integrity that requirement that is very high, then it will change immediately the CVSS score to a very high number. If it is just medium, if it is low, or it's not defined, if you don't want to touch this value. Okay, let's say we have a medium requirement, and the availability for us is very high in this system, because if this system is not working, we can't earn money, or processes still not, or it's not functional, or whatever. Then you can adjust here the availability requirement. So if you have this one, okay, this mostly is at least low, medium, or high. It really depends. Let's say it's medium. So the next is that we are modifying. For example, here the attack vector is over the network, but it could be that in our environment I have at least the need to go over an adjusted network. And this is reducing immediately the vulnerability from not defined or over the internet up to or down to a dedicated network segment that is isolated, for example. Then this is not so critical anymore. Modified attack complexity could be high because I have some environments, firewalls, whatever. I need maybe at least low requirements on the privileges. I have user interaction. I think here we have no user interaction, but maybe we have some predefined things, or we have a modified version, or we have something in front of, so we need at least user interaction. Then you see that it is changing slowly, and so on and so on. So here scope was changed, but in our case there is no scope, so it is unchanged. So it's reducing it because we don't have it. We had just installed without any virtualization. There is no way to escape. Then this is definitely changing the environment, and so on and so on. So if you have done this one, then you see that from a original 7.4, it could go down to a 4.4 for my environment, but it can go exactly in the other way. So for example, you have here the scope unchanged and no user interaction, and you say, okay, in my one the scope can be changed because now we have it, and I need, I don't know, user interaction is none, and so on and so on. So what I want to show here is, first of all, we have this CVSS calculator. Make sure that you're always using the CVSS calculator that fits to your specification. So if you have 3.1 CVSS values, use a corresponding calculator. You can analyze here with the base score and the temporal score what is the difference between a temporal fix and a workaround, for example, or an official fix, or if it is unavailable. So you can analyze the importance of every element inside the scores. And the most interesting thing is you can calibrate the CVSS value for your own needs if you have the possibility to work with environmental scores, and then you can modify and see if this CVSS value is so critical for you, or even more critical. So altogether, it will give you a very good way to understand the dedicated elements of the CVSS value. You can understand how it's built with base and temporal score, and you can modify with environmental score so that you can see how important it will be for you. So everything together is a nice way to learn more, practically learn more about the CVSS system itself. And have in mind, you have here the specification and user guide, and so you can see how this is used, defined, and so on and so on. So this is the CVSS calculator and environmental score.
So we learned a lot about the CVSS values, what is CVE, how to get it. We had a short recap on the CVSS metrics and the components. I showed you where you get the components out of the basic metric, and then how to use the CVSS calculator to generate the environmental metric that can save a lot of your time. So if you want to have a little bit more hands-on, check out. I have at JFrog a few webinars for free. I have a bunch of workshops where we can do it manually, and you can just try it if you want to have it in the context of DevSecOps. And otherwise, well, what I'm doing now, I will now search for a good place because I need a place to sleep for tonight. I'm here in the woods for, in total 7 days. Maybe 8, I'm not really sure. But it's fantastic. If you like this style and want to see a little bit more from the Swedish woods, check out my YouTube channel. I really would like to see you as my new subscriber. Check out the JFrog channel as well. A bunch of my videos are available there as well around the topic security, not only my channel, but I really would like to see you on one of these best channels as a new subscriber. Otherwise, I can say enjoy the rest of the day, stay safe, and see you.